In today's video, I'm going to show you guys how I painted this sweet mother and baby horse using just a few materials. Painting horses can be challenging enough as it is without having to think about all the different color mixes. So I wanted to show you guys that it's possible to achieve great results using only a few colors and minimal supplies. So let's talk about the materials. I'm using Arches 140-pound cold pressed cotton watercolor paper. This is in block form, which means the four sides are glued down, except for a small section. This helps prevent warping and buckling when you apply the water. My paints are the Winsor & Newton Cotman Sketchbox set, which comes with 12 half pans and a water brush. A water brush is simply a container or a reservoir that unscrews from the brush head. You fill it with water, pop it back together, and when you squeeze the reservoir, water is dispensed from the brush tip. The bristles stay wet, which means you don't need to be constantly dipping your brush in water to get your paint flowing. But for small details, I am going to use a smaller brush. I'm using my Escoda size 2 round brush. And then for the whisker details at the end, I'll be using my opaque white gouache by Winsor & Newton. So to start out, I'm going to just use my water brush and squeeze some water out onto the paper. I'm going to stay mostly within the lines right now, and I'm avoiding just the star on the mare's forehead. Any areas that are going to be white, I just want to leave those dry so that my paint does not seep into those areas. I want the paper to be glistening but not puddling. My first color I'm mixing up is yellow ochre, and I'm just applying this generously all over the area that's wet. In areas where I want the color to be a little more vibrant, I'm just using more pigment, as you can see here, and watering it down a little more in areas where I want it to be lighter. My next color is burnt sienna, and this is just bringing in a nice rich reddish hint to the cheek of the horse, around the eyes, and just adding some nice color variations. A chestnut horse, of course, is a reddish brown. Now, if you're not sure how to make brown, all you have to do is mix burnt sienna and ultramarine, and this makes a nice, rich, almost neutral brown that you can use for a lot of the painting process. I'm using that for the mane and along the neck, and just really starting to define the shapes here. I want to create a drip effect at the bottom, so I'm just tilting my board with lots of water and letting it drip all the way down to the bottom. I am intensifying some of the shadows and really just blocking in basic colors right now, just using a combination of yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and a little bit of that ultramarine to make my brown a little bit richer. I'm mixing up some light ultramarine here for the muzzle. It's kind of a light bluish gray, and so I'm just blocking in that color on both the mare and the foal's noses. I'm now beginning the foal's head. I'm just wetting the paper just like I did with the mare, and starting to add some yellow ochre, some more color. The two horses are pretty much the same color, so I'm using the same combinations, burnt sienna and ultramarine to make brown, and then more pure hints of burnt sienna just so that I don't end up neutralizing my color too much. I want to maintain some bright pops of color all throughout. You might find that you have to continually be mixing up fresh color. I'm starting to go a little bit darker in the ears. My first hint of dark color again is that combination of burnt sienna and ultramarine and a little bit of Payne's gray, and I'm painting in the mare's ears really dark. This is kind of a final layer. I'm negative painting around some of those mane hairs coming across the front that are catching the light, and then intensifying the shadow underneath the mane. You can add a little bit more pigment to make it darker, and then just use a clean watered down brush to blend out those edges. Add some flyaway hairs just to make it look even more realistic. And I'm adding pops of color, that burnt sienna and yellow ochre, so that the color isn't too neutral, but looks nice and fresh and vibrant. You can intensify the shadows in the ears and then blur those out into a lighter color on the top so it looks like a nice shadow in mid-tone. Just continue to add layers of color all across your mare's head, and you can darken up where you see shadow shapes in your reference photo. In my reference photo, there's not a lot of contrast, so it's okay to intensify some of that contrast if you want more of a pop. There's a little highlight above the eye I want to preserve. I'm just using watered down yellow ochre, and then I'm trying to darken up the neck and avoid little highlights where the light is catching. It's easy to get flat color that looks really boring if all you're doing is applying flat layers, so be sure to mix up your colors and add a variety. Play with your values, do lots with light and dark, and make sure you have a lot of contrast. The key to realism is making sure that you have strong contrast, really bright highlights, and dark shadows. If you'd really like to follow along with this painting but maybe feel like it's moving a little bit too fast, click on the link in the description for the fully narrated real-time version of this tutorial, where you can also download my sketch and my reference photo. I'll leave a link in the description where you can see all the tutorials that are currently available. And I'll be adding more every single month. While you're there, be sure to grab my free guide on watercolor basics. All right, let's get back to the video. So we're going really dark with the nostrils here in the mouth. We're using straight lamp black and a little bit more watered down in the muzzle. And then going darker with our brown hints that are helping define the shape of the eyes. While I'm letting that first layer dry on the mare, I'm going to start on the foal. I'm using the same process of blocking in color, mostly burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and a little bit of ultramarine to help neutralize that color. Make sure to avoid the stars and add a little bit of texture around the edge. And if you apply too much water, you can always soak it up with a paper towel. Sometimes it's easy to squeeze the water brush a little too hard and release too much water, but of course, it's nothing we can't fix. I'm using ultramarine and burnt sienna for the inside of the ear, and then just darkening up those shapes on the mare once that first layer has dried. I like to work in layers because I think it lends a nice complexity to the finished look of the painting. I'm switching to my smaller brush now and just taking some lamp black, and I'm starting to paint the eyes. For tiny details like this, I do find that a synthetic or natural bristle brush holds the tip better than the water brush does. So if you decide to travel with your water brush, maybe take along a detail brush as well. I'm darkening up the shadows inside of the mother's ears and then just adding some nice dark shadow shapes inside of the mane. Always be sure to paint your brush strokes in the direction that you see the hair growing. For the inside of the left eye, I'm using burnt sienna and then just darkening it up with a blob of black. Once that's dry, we'll go back in and add a few more details. But I can continue to darken around the outside of the eye and add more layers to the face. So far you can see I've really just used 3 or 4 colors, and we have a lot of variety inside our painting with just that. Just make sure again that you're using pure colors as well as neutral mixes. With the eye dry, I can go ahead and add the black details now and darken up the pupil. For the nose, I'm using lamp black, and I'm just watering it down a little bit around the edges. Where you want your paint to go lighter, just squeeze out more water. If it starts to bleed a little too much, you can scoop that up with a thirsty dry brush. Avoid little highlights here and there, such as around the nostrils. That adds a lot of contrast and some great detail to your painting. Don't worry about getting all the little texture details until the first layer is dry. In the meantime, you can continue to intensify the colors in the face and in the neck and just add more layers. Once you're happy with those initial washes, you can start adding more details. For the texture on the muzzle, you can use a dry brush technique, which means scrubbing your brush along the surface and letting the paper texture kind of do the work for you. Your brush catches on the edges and creates these really interesting textures, and it's really perfect for places on a painting like the muzzle of the horse. I'm just darkening up the mouth again, and then I'm going to start the eye on the foal. There are a couple little eyelashes that are catching the light, so I'm just carefully painting around those, and then adding the details all around the eye using my fine detail brush. If it feels a little stark, you can blur out those details with the water brush and a little bit of water, and that'll help make it look a little less linear. I'm just darkening up the mane and using my detail brush to pull out some of those hair details, and then adding one more layer to the ear and using kind of a scumbling effect to create the mane on the foal. For the muzzle, I'm using some more ultramarine and adding some more dark burnt sienna layers to the top of the head. It looks really bright, but it will dry lighter, so keep that in mind. I'm keeping the transition of the necks down to the bottom of the painting really loose and washed out. The nostrils again are pure lamp black, and I'm using that same dry brush technique to kind of scrub along the surface of the paper. This can be a little hard on your brushes, but I think it's an awesome effect and it looks so pretty. For the whiskers, I'm just using white gouache on my tiny detail brush and just gently painting those all around the muzzle. For the foal, I'm going to just darken that up slightly so it's not pure white, just so you can see it. And then for the background, I'm using my nice spring green here and just using lots of water and lots of paint and just making it look really loose and stylistic. And there's our finished Mare and Foal. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you find horses are challenging and you'd like to learn more about painting realistic animals, check out these other videos and I'll see you there.